You're listening to the PR Wind Down Podcast, the show for public relations professionals who are ready to see real change in the PR industry. We are your hosts, April White and Laura Schooler. Let's get ready to wind down.
Ta-da! So how are you?
I'm good.
Do you feel differently now that you've met me in person?
100% different. It's just funny that in person, what did you say, that you were the straight man on this and then I was the straight man in person?
Yes.
Basically.
Yeah, which is very funny. I did not see that coming.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's I mean, I just didn't think about it, but that's me. Yeah. It wasn't like you got like a weird version of me or something. That's like, I don't even know, I don't even know. I've been known to be considered aloof for like, I don't know.
Very interesting.
Yeah, but I just think it's because, I mean, well, actually, it's funny because when I was looking at the photos that we took, everybody, April and I met and we had this whole photo shoot. And so when I'm looking at the photos, and I can see as time went on, I'm seemingly more comfortable or animated than in the beginning.
For sure, yes.
I can see it, and I look like a middle-aged mom in the beginning, and then I look more like myself as it goes on. I mean, totally. And these without the glasses on, I feel like I look like I'm 70-year-old, like verging on grandma. And just put on some
so funny
$17 glasses, and it's like a whole other thing.
It's funny. So wait, was I different than you expected?
No.
Oh, that's hilarious. So you knew I was going to be a wild and crazy girl.
That's funny. No, you're, Phoebe from Friends. But we knew that.
Oh my God, that's so funny. All right, well, I'm glad we established that. Well, with that, do you want to jump into things I should have been trained on?
So do, because there's so many things that everybody should have been trained on. So, especially during this time, the after time, managing virtual work relationships. And interestingly, we can talk about the fact that we just met in real life, what was that, a week and a half ago?
Yeah.
But that we have known each other for years now, and that we met, I guess, on Upwork.
Yeah.
And like kept in touch. Well, because you're really good at keeping in touch. You're, good at that. And we sort of had like a couple of close calls, and then it was, or when I say close calls, I mean, we almost came together to do something. And then it wasn't until, what was that company, the SaaS, that they were getting that funding or whatever. And I took that on and like got
Crushed.
The Wall Street Journal. Yeah, that was a pretty good one.
That was amazing.
I
was like, damn, girl.
That was a good dress rehearsal for you or whatever. And then it just sort of went from there. But I mean, isn't that how everybody met the past 3 years, basically? I mean, job interviews,
pretty much,
networking,
yeah,
everything. So now the question is, and I've been reading a ton of articles about this, especially with hybrid companies that were in person that had to go completely virtual, and they're now either forcing or trying to massage back into hybrid. And there's a lot of issues with that. Mm-hmm. So nobody could have been taught how to manage this because it didn't exist before, right? But you've been doing virtually the whole time.
Yep, since before the pandemic.
I don't know if you were trained to do this, but you've been doing it. You don't have the hybrid thing, so maybe we will get to that. But so how did you determine the best way to manage and work with people virtually?
I was lucky in that my first PR job in New York was in the satellite office of a Minneapolis-based ad and PR firm, Carmichael Lynch Spong, it was called at the time. And so because there were only 5 of us in the New York office and the rest of the staff was in Minneapolis, I had to get pretty good right off the bat at figuring out how to make connections with people and friendships and like work those relationships on the phone. And then, but we had the advantage of getting together whatever we did for, different events and all agency staff things, and when they came to New York, etc. So
But you weren't using Zoom or anything, I assume.
No, it was just the phone and email. And I'm still really dear friends with both Sarah Blood and Aaron Matthew, who I met through Carmichael and Spong back in the day, right? So both of those relationships were so strong that they turned into friendships that, have gone well past when we met. So that's pretty cool. I think so, I think some of it was through necessity, and then after that everything else was in person. But then when I started freelancing, it was kind of the same thing. So I think some of it just came over the years of doing that. I think that video calls do help quite a bit in terms of sustaining that. And I know that, for example, my number 2, Lana, she always wants to do calls where she sees people and showing them that she's paying attention, because she feels like if you're not on video and you're not looking at each other, it's not clear whether or not you're giving somebody your undivided attention. Right.
You're like doing who knows what.
I think the foundation of any good relationship is authenticity and honesty and transparency. And I don't think that there's any difference in doing that virtually versus in person. In fact, I think some people are more comfortable being vulnerable and honest and open when they're not sitting across the table from somebody. I feel like there's a little bit of anonymity that happens virtually.
Yeah,
in
I think
a way,
so.
It's almost advantageous. I know that sounds crazy, but it's almost like, because you're not sitting there and you don't have to then get up out of the table and go to the conference room, you just had an awkward conversation. You just get to click off and like not see that person until the next time you're on camera, instead of like seeing them again in the, at the coffee pot or in the bathroom. It's like, oh God, 20 minutes ago, we had that awkward conversation. So, so there, I think it helps people integrate and process difficult information. And not that it's like everything is difficult, but obviously, people are people and you're always going to have some clashes here and there. And it's just, it's in a way, it's nice, I think, to be able to step back and not need to.
But were you trained on any of this stuff?
No, of course not.
Yeah.
No, I did train myself. What do you wish that you had been trained on to do this better yourself?
Well, so what you said is true. I mean, I've worked for huge companies and I was dealing with people in, mostly probably the UK, but, sometimes Asia, so who knows where, other states, other cities, Canada, all the time. I mean, we all did. So the fact that this whole like working virtually and never seeing your colleagues except maybe once every 2 years, that really wasn't entirely new if you worked at like a big company. And actually, when I worked at PwC, a number of people worked from home quite a bit on the PR team, or were, in offshoot offices, and they never went to their office, because why would they go into some offshoot office when their whole team was based in New York? So I've been working like that with people, for a long time. I always went into the office, even though I didn't have to. I would go in every day because it was, for me, it was a feeling of like getting up, getting dressed, and like going to work and like doing that. I felt like I needed it and I wanted to do that. And I also felt like, this might be interesting, I thought that I would be perceived as a more dedicated employee, because there I showed up, I was in person, I would go to the meetings in person, I would go to like media trainings in person, I could go to a partner's office in person. I've learned that it wasn't true. I got laid off from big corporate America, and they didn't care if I hadn't been there, if I would have gotten laid off all the same. Doesn't really matter. When the cane is yanking you off the stage, they don't care where you sit.
No.
So don't let that be like, ooh, I should, I need to be there in person. But the other thing I've been hearing is that these companies are saying you must be in person, and like 40 to 50% of people just aren't going, and they're like, what are you going to do? You're going to fire all of us?
Yeah.
I dare you. I think it's big companies that are like, oh, you got to come to work and you got to work 3 days a week and you have to be there Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, or whatever it is, all these like rules that they're trying to put in there. And everybody now knows, like, oh, the whole thing was a hoax. We really didn't have to be in the office at all. The stock market went through the roof. This company made more money than ever, whatever. Like, we did not have to be there in person. And to try to put the toothpaste back in the tube.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, managing virtual relationships was just doing your work and being like, oh, this is the project I'm working on, and I need to talk to Sue and Bob who are in Colorado. And so I'll talk to Sue and Bob in Colorado. It's the same as I would talk to them if they were in the same office as me.
I mean, I think at the end of the day, just to kind of put a button on it, it feels to me like it's very easy with Zoom calls to just get very perfunctory about it and just only speak to whatever needs to be talked about and not have any chit chat about your lives. On the one hand, people that don't like fake talk love this.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, if you don't put any effort into, hey, tell me about how's your dog? How's your boyfriend?
Okay,
how's your husband? I think that it's like, it can be a little bit hard to build an actual relationship. As much as everybody's too busy and you don't have 5 minutes to shoot, like, I think you kind of have to. Unless you really don't like that person, don't fake it. Don't ever fake a relationship. I never recommend that. If you guys just don't see eye to eye and your relationship is just utilitarian, keep it that way. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Some relationships are. But if you actually like that person, take an extra 30 seconds to breathe and be like, hey, I like your shirt. Like, what is this? Tell me about, oh, where's Tilly today? I don't see her in the background. Like,
Tilly, she's right down there.
But like that kind of, like, hey, have you been working on music? All of those questions are like, that's how you make an actual relationship that then when you meet in person, you can amplify that relationship.
Then when you meet in person, you'd be like, oh my God, this is not at all what I thought this person was going to be like. I do think what you were saying about, especially if you're managing people, to really make sure that you are forcing yourself and being mindful of engaging people and finding out about their life outside of whatever work item that you have to discuss with them is probably even more important in the virtual or hybrid world than it was prior. I don't know that anybody was trained on any of that, but some people like you are just good at that anyway. Other people like me really have to be like, oh, right, I have to be nice and ask questions about their life, to allow them to give me as much or as little information as they want. I've been accused of not being good at it in person either, but virtually it's even more important. So.
Okay, fair enough. So should we move on to the next thing on our list here?
Why don't we do the horror story?
Okay, and then do our guests and then come back with news?
Yeah, and I can read it.
Okay, let's hear it.
Good morning, PR Wind Down. I have a good one here. Just happened to me last week. I work for a small agency in Atlanta where the founder is still pretty involved with our teams for the day-to-day tasks. Last month, we landed a new food and beverage client, a huge one for us, and the client wanted to kick off ASAP. So our internal account team started scrambling to get ready for the kickoff, scheduled for last week. All we needed was the finalized signed contract from the client, which my boss was handling. The client emailed my boss requesting a small change to the contract. Our team was copied as an FYI, and it looked like things were just about wrapped up. About a day and a half passed, and the client followed up for an update. Within 20 minutes, my boss sends our internal team a message in the team's chat, absolutely freaking out because he hadn't noticed the first email from the client. He even used all caps, so it was pretty clear this was meant to be yelling. He said it was our fault, that he didn't see the email, and that it's our responsibility to make sure that he sees every single one of his emails. This can never happen again, in all caps. He was adamant that he didn't want to hear that the email was addressed to him because it was our responsibility to keep track of the account. Our team gets copied on hundreds of emails to the boss every week. Are we supposed to follow up with him about every one of them? Am I supposed to call this man every time he gets an email and say, hey, did you get that email? Did you get the other one? All day? It didn't even hurt the deal. My boss updated the contract, client signed, and we kicked off the account. My only question is this: what the heck? Signed, help me. So this is what I think that besides, the typical nonsense of, I don't know, people's egos, or they just feel like yelling at somebody or blaming other people.
Right.
The thing here, it even said here, it didn't even hurt the deal. It wasn't like the client said, oh my God, where is this? It's been missing for 2 weeks, or the deal's off.
Yep.
Or, are you guys out of your mind? It said a day and a half, like the client sent an email and a day and a half later, what was like checking up. So like, what's the big deal here exactly? Like, why is anybody yelling at anybody?
There definitely should be no yelling going on, and all caps yelling is completely inexcusable.
Childish.
Yeah, it's just there's no room for that in a professional work setting. I think that there are a lot. I mean, I will say this, and I'm not defending this boss whatsoever or trying to take away from this person's horrific experience, which is undoubtedly infuriating. I will tell you this: after becoming an executive CEO, founder, etc., who is running around with her head cut off and trying to pretend that I'm not, it's the first time in my life that I've understood how that happens.
Right.
So
wait, understood how what happens?
So like, I've had a previous boss that was running, his or her own company, and it just seemed like everything was disorganized. It was chaos. This person never was on top of what was going on. They asked questions that I thought were really dumb. It just made me think, like, where is your head? Is it not screwed on? Like, I don't understand what happened here, right? And I understand missing emails. Like, I would never have understood a boss missing emails in the past.
Okay.
I would never have understood not remembering where something is that it seems obvious. I would never have understood, like, this is the first time where the shoe's on the other foot and I'm wearing it and I'm like, oh, now I get it. Now I get why that person showed up to new business meetings not knowing who they were meeting. Now I understand why this person, needed, 8 assistants to help them get through their emails. Now I understand. Like, I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit just to be a little bit funny here, but I get it finally, right? So on the one hand, it is not acceptable behavior, especially not the blaming other people and the yelling part of it. The missing an email part of it and feeling out of control and embarrassed, completely understandable.
Right. So that's probably where this boss person's reaction came from. Mm-hmm. But that's the thing. There was nothing really, it doesn't sound like that happened, that he looked like he dropped the ball.
No, it's just that feeling of being out of control, which I relate to. It's this feeling of like, and you're trying to show that you're on top of it and that you're running things and that, you know what's happening. But I think the bigger your company gets, as any founder will, if they're really honest, will tell you, most of the time it's like a miracle if they know what's going on. It's like, so many things to keep track of. It's so many people, it's so many clients, it's so many issues, it's so many HR problems, it's so many finance things, it's marketing it's like all of the things, and they're all in your brain, and you're responsible for all of them, and you're the one that has to sign off on all of the issues, right? And when that happens, it's like your CPU overload just makes your brain stop functioning properly. You're doing your best, but it still comes out in fits and starts, and it feels like a sputtering engine, right? It doesn't feel like things are clicking. And if you're a control freak, like it sounds like maybe this person is or was, or some version of that, you would really struggle.
So this is all I'll say, because exactly what you're saying, I think, is exactly what happened. Yeah. But this overreaction that now the team has to make sure that he sees all of his emails. Obviously, he doesn't mean that. But
I think what it is, and I mean, I have a similar like fail safe in place, right? My team knows that if they don't hear from me, I will never be offended if they're like, hey, just checking in if you're still gonna review this. Like, hey, just checking in to make sure you saw my Slack.
well,
Hey,
right, but that's what happened in this. I mean, I guess it was from the client
yeah,
who said, "Hey, checking in on the contract." I wouldn't you just say, "Oh, right, we're right on that."
I would be embarrassed because technically, new business, your number one
Right,
thing that you're supposed to be doing as a founder.
right,
So if you didn't send through a contract of a willing and able prospect, it
right.
would be the most horrific thing that could happen. That would make you feel like, how did this happen? How did I do it? And how did nobody else catch it? I think what can happen to people is they feel like it's all their responsibility and it all falls on them and nobody's there to help them. And
Right.
that's why you
And
hire good people. But if you have
right.
that mentality, which is easy to fall into, I'm not going to lie, it is easy to feel like,
Woe is me.
again, not to take away from this person's horrible experience because I'm sure it was infuriating. But
Right. That
at
you're right.
least give a
Infuriating is the right
perspective.
word, I think,
Like
for
give
this.
a perspective.
Yep.
It's like that would be awful, and you do want to feel like you have a team in place that can catch your mistakes. But I do not condone the behavior, the being frustrated, the taking out other people, and the yelling via caps. Like all of that is not cool.
You're right. But the thing I guess that's just it's so typical of agency, it's just too many flashbacks for me. So I understand this person would just be like, oh my God. And probably the whole team was working on 7 other clients all day. You know what I mean? It's not like anybody
Oh
had a
yeah,
whole lot of time to be like,
well,
oh,
I'm
let
sure
me make sure he saw this. And
sure
maybe they
everybody
assumed that
has
he
something,
did.
right.
And
There was
maybe they thought he had talked to the client and they didn't know, whatever. So,
right. It's
right.
like a coop of headless chickens. So I get it.
Yeah. So that is what it is. And I guess the other thing, I just feel like when you read this and then you think about I mean, I understand this is somebody's business and all, but it's like, okay, on the scale of what's important in the world, like this does not rank real high. So like, can everybody just get some
Yeah.
perspective and
I mean,
context?
depending on, right, you don't know what financial strains
Well,
you're
right,
against,
right.
overhead or lack of clients or loss of clients or incoming that didn't happen or budgeting mistakes, whatever. You don't know. But just don't ever yell at somebody via caps and make it their fault.
I'll try not to.
With that, should we let our guest in?
Yes, let's do that. Ready? Here we go. So, our guest today is David Oates. He's the founder of PR Security Service. He's a crisis PR expert with 25 years of experience in the field and has served as an officer in the US Navy. He's here to discuss crisis PR strategy and best practices. Hello, David.
It's great to see you. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I can live in the dream.
Before I get into your company, did you do PR in any way for the Navy?
I did. That's how I got my start in PR and then specifically crisis PR. So I was in for 9 years, the first half as what they call a surface warfare officer. So I was on surface ships, combat and engineering roles, and doing all of the watchstanding and all the things you might see in various movies. But as a junior officer, you get assigned these other collateral duties, and mine was the public affairs officer. And when I realized it had all the makings of things I love, whether community relations, news media relations, and other internal communications, employee communications, things like that, I found out that there were 200 officers, this out of probably 56,000 officers in the Navy, that did public affairs as their full-time job. And I went, I got to figure out how to get me that gig. And in San Diego, there was a handful of those who did that. And literally off duty and part-time hours, I would just knock on their doors and be just a royal pest in asking to be mentored. And how do I get into this? And they showed me the ropes and told me how to apply for a transfer to that. And over an 18-month period, I got accepted. I went to a 2-month defense information school, kind of an immersion program. And then they sent me right back out to the fleet. I was stationed in Haiti for 6 months as a spokesperson for a joint military operation. I was on an aircraft carrier for 2 years. And not only in the proactive PR realm, but crisis is just part of what happens when you're active duty in the Navy and forward deployed operations. So I cut my teeth on a wide range of stories that I can regale you on. But you name the crisis, I probably saw a flare of it before my 30th birthday. And then in the private sector, I kept that up, working for a couple of PR agencies, and then hung up my own shingle. Honestly, I wish I'd done it 10 years ago. The things I get to do now, I'm having the time of my life helping organizations and individuals.
So is it the lion's share of the crisis social media or mobile communications caused or driven?
They have origins there for sure. Somebody takes a disparaging remark, it starts to go viral, it blows up, and media picks up on it after the fact. And so it's sort of the tail wagging the dog, because that's where the majority of people now get their information. They don't get it necessarily from the 6 o'clock news or the local paper. They get it from an influencer. They get it from somebody that they're following. And it turns into something that's broader. And about half of the crisis communications issues that I tackle for on behalf of an organization may never see a traditional news outlet, but is causing disruptions, taking them away from normal operations, their brand and their reputations being in question. We're starting to see diminishing returns in terms of revenue growth, even being able to keep current revenue stable. And they're certainly seeing profitability start to erode. And probably as important, they're seeing really good people start to question whether they want to work for this company again and look elsewhere. In this day and age where we're still in the great resignation and the great reshuffle, it's a real issue.
To build on that, are you also seeing crisis issues arising now out of the cancel culture and highly politicized landscape?
I'm going to take a contrarian view from that. I don't think the cancel culture is anything new. I just think it's now got amplified by social media.
Yep.
I think it's always been there. People have always taken pot shots at organizations. It was just done largely around a water cooler, right? Or the local coffee shop or something along that nature there. It didn't have sort of the accelerating amplification capabilities that social media affords somebody to do so. But I think it's always been there. I will tell you this. I think organizations oftentimes create their own cancel culture. When you get one or two people who maybe take exception to even a proactive post that an organization does, they're spouting some sort of new product or this achievement and things like that, and somebody takes aim at them, instead of letting that go, especially if they've got 10 other positive posts, but one, for whatever reason, doesn't like what you had to say, they respond to it. And they typically respond to it in a point counterpoint debate, maybe even some cases going a little bit farther and trying to discredit the accusation because they take it personally, right? The owners and the business executives take that kind of, questioning their integrity personally. And all they do is they amplify that voice, that cancel voice. They create greater animosity. It extends the news cycle. Now people are starting to think maybe there was a there. They sort of have a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I get called in sometimes and they go, this cancel culture, is really just taking exception from that. Yeah, but you sort of lit the match on that kindling wood. There's a better way to message this, right? And that's what I do. I often take business executives and owners off the ledge and out of their comfort zone and how to respond with empathy and action. It doesn't mean culpability when there's none to be made, but I walk them through a better way to respond in this day and age.
Right. What are the number one mistakes they're making in that regard?
They either don't comment, right? I'm not going to dignify that with a response. And so you allow that narrative to fester on its own, and your lack of attention to it leads people sometimes to misperceive you as either being incompetent or unfeeling. Or you create this point counterpoint debate like I talked about, where they're going, no, you're wrong, you're adding this on, you're blowing this up, you don't know what you're talking about. How dare you respond to that one there? Where do you get off? Oh, great. So now there's a there. Now they say, well, you're methinks DOS protest too much. So I've got to take them out of a comfort zone. There's two cardinal rules. I don't care what the organization is. I don't care the industry, nonprofit, government, military, for-profit. Two things you got to do in every crisis communication situation. You have to express empathy and have to express action. Again, doesn't mean you have to admit fault. If there's no fault to be had, somebody's just taking a pot shot. But you have to give them the impression that you hear them, that you care, and here's what we're going to do about correcting the misperception. Or if it's something you did, right? Everybody has a bad day. Then here's how you're going to fix it. And people will give you the benefit of the doubt. But that takes a lot of courage, and it also takes them getting out of their comfort zone. But if you do it and you do it well, the issue dies sooner rather than later. And my job is to get organizations and individuals back to what they were normally doing.
I've done a few things, crisis communications. I've worked for big companies before. And I always say that the way to help crises from the get-go is figure out what sorts of crises your company is most inclined to face and be prepared with, who's assigned to do what on the team, like a statement or a talking point around that issue that you figure might be, your hot button issue or issues, and to get out responding to that on social media, like within 30 minutes of something blowing up. Now, this doesn't apply to every situation, but it's most of the big companies that sort of applied. And then you've addressed it.
Empathy in action, right? But
Right.
You bring up an excellent point, Laura, and that is, can you prepare
Yes.
and prep for a crisis communication event? Because some people say, well, you can't prep for something that becomes a crisis because you don't see about it. No, that's wrong. It's like any other risk management strategies, which we all know organizations should have and many don't, because it sort of falls in the back burner as you're dealing with different priorities of the day, right?
Some people buy it, some people don't, right?
Totally, right? But everybody has inherent risks to the business and inherent risks to the operations. And as much as you try to mitigate those, right, from ransomware and IT, cyber breaches and things like that, employee mishaps, you're an organization, you're an entity, things may happen.
Right.
And in this day and age, where, as I said, everybody's carrying around these little portable communication devices and become, oh, by the way, de facto news outlets, whether they're qualified for that or not. In my little, phone here, I've got a camera, I've got a microphone, and because of my social media apps, I have a distribution system. Without an FCC license, I become my own broadcaster.
Right.
And so if you, in this day and age, aren't prepared to answer a crisis that is possibly to happen because of the nature of your business, you just are that much behind the curve. You got an hour. You have an hour to get something out there, or at least be prepared for that before something could very well go viral. So I would suggest to organizations and entities, look at your inherent risks. Hopefully you've got a risk mitigation plan. If you don't, think about that and include crisis communication planning in that. It'll at least stave off the catastrophic events, if not prevent something from occurring altogether.
And have you dealt with trying to help a company, reduce the negative press coverage they have out there on Google? I've gotten questions like, how do I get these things further down the Google page?
The short answer is yes. The long answer is yes, but it's different than what most people think. There's no magic wand that can take that off of the blogosphere and the internet, right? It is what it is. It's there permanently. You have to create your own content, and it's got to be more popular over the long term than that. So ultimately, Google will rank the bad content so far down that it appears on page 2 or 3. That takes, especially if you're starting from scratch, right? If you got an organization that doesn't have an active internet presence with regular blog postings, regular videos, regular social media posting, things like that, if they're sort of leaving their brand to chance online and you're starting from scratch, count on a 6-figure repaired job, and it's going to take 18 months to 2 years. That's just the nature of it. If the stuff that's currently on Google starts to appear in the first half of the first page, it's like cement. It'll cure really quickly, and it takes a lot to break it apart.
Chisel it off, yeah.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, how do you combat? I know that there's this, principle in place where the first narrative that gets out there tends to be the one that sticks, and then trying to correct it afterwards is almost impossible. How do you deal with that, right? How do you correct a narrative that's already been very pervasive that's incorrect?
I'll give you an example. The answer is it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of content, it takes a lot of good storytelling. I had a matter where it was one of my great privileges to help a doctor in Houston by the name of Dr. Hassan Gokul, who was wrongfully accused of stealing vaccines, lost his job, and was actually charged by the Harris County, Houston area district attorney because he charged this person with stealing vaccines. And what he did do when after being charged with vaccines, had an open vial with 10 dosage left. Instead of putting it in the trash, essentially, which is what his bosses wanted to do, in December of 2000, when ICU beds were full and there were ambulances rolled up on the hospitals with COVID patients in the ambulances waiting for an ICU bed to open up, he decided to get a hold of people who qualified, 65 and older comorbidity, to use these vaccines. No vaccine went to waste. And he put in all the proper paperwork and all that sort of stuff there. And the DA, without ever talking to his attorney, and without ever talking to him, charged him with theft, put out a press release, and the story went global. It was Dr. Steele's vaccines. They disparaged this person without any due process. We spent 4.5 months in getting his story out there and having him interviewed. Front page, top fold, New York Times, all the cable outlets. I had him interviewed live on ABC The View. And now you Google his name, it talks about how he was not charged by the grand jury and how he's suing Harris County Public Health for wrongful termination. But that took 6 months to do and a full on media blitz to make that happen. That's the kind of effort it takes. And I was privileged to do that for one of the finest men I've ever had the privilege of knowing. But that's the kind of effort it needs to take. And we were lucky enough to do it at that point. I'm still passionate about that more than a year later.
Wow. I mean, that hits on all of the, big news. I mean, there's so many hot buttons in that one. No wonder it was such a project of length and depth and of the media stature that it received. Wow. When negative press hits, do you have to sort of be a therapist and be like, what is it that you're getting to the heart of the matter of their...
That's a lot of what I do, is trying to talk business owners off the ledge and executives and others and individuals and show them a path to where they can repair, if not preserve their reputation.
Right. Or is it because they're going to lose funding, or is it, what's the...
Oh, yeah. When you're a leader of an organization or you have an entity or your own brand that has, some value on that, they see their professional and by extension, because of their identity, their personal lives flash in front of their eyes. And I tell that from people. I get asked sometimes, like the doctor notwithstanding, who's a really good guy. Some people ask, well, how can you be a crisis PR for an organization that responded in this manner and really just looked really silly? Like, aren't they bad people? No, people panic in states of duress. And when they see themselves being called into question, their reputation being, basically sucker punched, either wrongfully so or taken so egregiously out of context that the little misstep that they had now looks like something bordering on really bad criminal, they panic, right? And they respond, as I said before, and in their natural state, which doesn't necessarily bode well in the public domain when you're trying to communicate effectively about what you're going to do about it. So a lot of what I do is trying to tell organizations and individuals about how to effectively communicate something out of their natural state and get out of that panic mode and into a position where, again, they can clearly articulate what they're trying to say in a way that diffuses the situation and gets them back to normal operations.
I love that. Yeah, we just talked about that in our horror story of the day. Somebody having a panic attack and then the boss basically acting out as a result. But I mean, I feel like your Navy training must have helped you immensely. And I'm curious what you learned in the Navy that you're applying in crisis PR.
The two things that I learned really quickly in the Navy, and particularly in the public affairs officer, learned to think critically, quickly. A lot of people can think critically. A lot of people can think quickly, not at the same time. And what they do, and this goes back to sort of the idea that we talked about earlier about training and planning for an event. We practiced a wide array of different crisis scenarios and how there were going to be statements, how to prepare for those gotcha questions, who's going to speak when, how, all of the tactics that you have in there, and how you're going to respond. And we always prepped that needed to respond within an hour. And this is the days long before social media, because we knew we had to get statements out primarily internally first. And this is probably also something that I rely on my Navy background that I tell organizations. Your first audience that you need to concern yourself with is your staff, because your staff is the director of first impressions to your customers, your partners, sometimes your investors and other people that'll help you do your job well. And by the way, if you don't keep your employees informed, they will be the first ones to undermine you, even inadvertently, when a reporter or a friend or somebody calls them up and they say, I haven't been told anything. That doesn't bode well for a brand. Interestingly enough, not a lot of PR practitioners are skilled in the crisis communications. And my training in the Navy and my experience in forward deployed operations really are beneficial. I rely on that a lot.
Yeah, I can imagine. Is there a type of crisis that's the hardest to get through of all those, categories that you've now lived through?
The hardest really doesn't have to do with a particular event. It has to do with the mindset of the organization. If they don't want to be as open as they can be, and there may be privacy or legal reasons why you can't, but if they can be as transparent as they can, expressing empathy and action, you can at least give yourself an opportunity. Where businesses fall short is when they're not forthright, they're not candid. They want to shield, to a large degree, statements or information only because they're uncomfortable to stay. They may be truthful, but they don't want to say because, this is really going to make it look bad. Hey, good news doesn't get better with age. It's like fish, right? A fish after a few days doesn't smell any better. Trust me, get this done, right? And so sometimes I will tell organizations, look, I'm not here to make this look good. I'm here to make this less bad and get you back to normal operations. That's my goal. We try to avoid pain as much as possible, even if it's to our detriment, or even if doing so delays the pain that we're going to have to pay later on. Oh, by the way, with interest. So yeah, I do that all day long.
So that's the human condition, right?
Yeah. It is, absolutely.
And how much of the crisis, situations that you're running into, do you think come from the fact that the company is not doing something that they should be doing? It's sort of like the storytelling and story doing aren't aligned, and they're not their integrity is already a question, which then leads to a crisis.
I guess the question is, do I take on clients that are purposefully nefarious and are not
and are not trying to ask.
But maybe you don't. But the idea is like, look, they're trying to espouse this and they did this. I've had a couple of instances where organizations come to me saying, we're getting really bad press. They're accusing us of this, and we just want to make them go away. And I go, well, is there some truth to that? Well, yeah, but they've got it really wrong. Well, wait a minute. There's some truth to this, and your customers are saying this, and you've just gotten a rating from the Better Business Bureau. This is wrong. Are you willing to change it? No, we're not. Then go find somebody else. I am not a public defender. If you are not willing to take customer feedback, if you're not willing to take your employee feedback, you're not willing to look at the things that you should be doing better. If you want to say, look, you know what? We had blinders on. We didn't mean this intentionally. This wasn't nefarious. We just screwed up. I'll help you all day long for that one there. On matters relating to just poor customer service or criminal matters, I'll help you all day long if you're contrite and you're wanting to fix things, again, with empathy and action. But you want to just make it go away? Trust me, I got plenty of other business to deal with. Go find somebody else who's willing to do that. Though I don't know anybody who does.
Right. Because it's not really possible, right? In an honest way, right?
Well, and then I have to worry about my own reputation. Oh, am I the one who was sort of trying to put lipstick on the pig?
So funny. This has been really, really interesting. I think we hit all the marks. Is there anything that you want to plug, or you want to share how people can reach you?
Anyone can go to my website, publicrelationssecurity.com. Go to the contact page. You can schedule a 15-minute consultation with me, free of charge, no obligation. Tell me your problem. I'll give you my 2 cents worth. I love what I do. If I can be a resource for you, by all means, use me. I'll do that all day long.
I love it. It really comes across, Dave. We can tell that you're passionate about this.
I appreciate that.
You seem like a fish in water. It seems like, you found your calling. I love when I find, somebody feels like they found their calling and they love what they do and they're still doing it and they're the best of the craft. And it's refreshing.
Okay. Be well.
Dave,
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye. It was all I could do to not start singing In the Navy by the Village People.
Oh my God. Wait,
in the Navy. Sail the 7 seas in the Navy. We want you. We want you. We want. You probably wouldn't have liked that too much.
Oh. All right. Well, we definitely have to leave that in because that's hilarious. So let's see. We should move on to our PR news of the week. And we have 2 options for this week that we're excited about. So Morning Brew reported that Glassdoor had to hand over identities behind negative reviews of a New Zealand toy company. Xero issued a subpoena against Glassdoor to name the former employees who, among other criticisms, called the toy company a, quote, burnout factory. Woo, woof. So this is horrifying for anybody who's left a Glassdoor review and was hoping or assuming or relying on the fact, I should say, that it was going to be anonymous, right? Nobody leaves a negative Glassdoor review thinking that they're going to figure out who it was.
Right.
And so basically, the judge ruled that the anonymous review site Glassdoor would have to hand over the identities of 6 biting reviews. The decision not only threatens Glassdoor's privacy policy, but its whole existence. So, speaking of crisis, right. This is a huge crisis for Glassdoor.
Right. So, I don't know what was the legal foundation for forcing Glassdoor to turn over the identities of the negative reviewers.
Let's see. Ultimately, federal judge argued that because the identities of the disgruntled Xero employees are most likely not U.S. citizens, they're not protected by U.S. free speech law. So now New Zealand courts will have to decide in future litigation which Xero intends to pursue if the former employees defame the company with their review.
Oh, it's about free speech laws.
Free speech thing that didn't translate to New Zealand.
I don't know if I've ever left a negative review about anything because I'm so paranoid that people will figure out it's me. So I don't trust it.
It's a $1.2 billion business though. And
Is
its
that how much?
entire existence relies on
Right, relies on
people
that.
honestly review nearly 2.2 million companies.
Well, that's one question. What is the company Zuru, if that's the way you pronounce it? What are they going to do when they find out about the 6 former employees or disgruntled employees?
They said that then they will pursue a defamation case if
So
they
they get money, I guess, sue for money for
defamation.
wow. So you're not allowed to say that your company stunk or that your managers at the company were terrible.
I mean, what does this mean for Yelp too, right? It's like the same.
Right. That's about what, like restaurants or stores or whatever business, I guess, right? Doctors. Yeah. I mean, you're not allowed. So if you say something bad that may or may not be true, you can't basically.
I mean, on the one hand, I'm sure that it's frustrating to companies where anybody that's disgruntled, had a bad experience, can just write whatever they want and it's online forever.
But it's like cockroaches. What are they going to like stamp out every single person who says a bad thing?
Now it's like back to the other thing, just fix it, like make your culture better and then that
Right. And, I think everybody understands that when you read those things, sometimes the employee's a little nuts. Whenever I read those things, I can tell when it's somebody who's just like always complaining about stuff versus somebody who had a more legitimate one. What do you think the purpose of being the person who goes on Glassdoor to shred their former employer? Because they want to inflict pain on the company because the company had inflicted pain on them, right?
I think it's a combination of that and also hoping that other people don't make the same mistake or don't, that you're able to help.
You're aware of what you're walking into.
Yeah, like that any future employees are going to read that first before they make a bad decision and find out the hard way.
I just don't know how impactful those things are. If you're somebody who is desperately in need of a job or dying to work at company ABC, are you going to not take the job because a few people are like, this place stinks, the management makes you work too hard?
It depends if you have a different offer, right? If you had,
right.
I mean, I guess the only other reason to do it is if you started your own competitive agency and you wanted to crap on them to get.
Well, right, and that's what restaurants I think do to each other.
That's kind of gross. So it's better to pay attention. So if you have a couple of offers and one seems to have a really toxic culture, according to a few reviews, and one doesn't, take the one that doesn't, even if it pays, right? I mean, unless money is a huge concern and obviously you have to make your own decisions, but still better to go in knowing like, oh, okay, general, like lay of the land. These are the issues most people have.
Yep.
My eyes are open. I can then try to navigate them clearly, right? It's like a little bit like, I mean, I try to give my staff, if I think that a client is going to be specific about certain things or angry about certain things or particular in a certain way or whatever, I try, even in the business process, I try to relay that information and say, hey, just they're this kind of personality type. I think if we do this X, Y, Z, it might piss them off. If we do A, they'll be really happy. So I would just err to the side of, Right. So I mean, I think it's just another good example of having all the information possible to make a good decision and then, handle yourself accordingly.
What's the PR player lesson in this, though?
The PR player lesson, I mean, what's interesting is that it's terrible PR for Glassdoor and Yelp and any of those services. I think this just goes back to me beating the same drum I always beat, but it also goes to show why free speech is so important, because if you can't even go out and express when somebody's mistreated you as an individual, whether it's a corporation or a company or a restaurant or the government, or whatever it is, God help us, right? So I think we need to be really grateful for it and protect it, because this is a great example of that. But also I think it's interesting to take note for any companies where free speech is the primary kind of underpinning of its success.
Yeah.
They're going to go international. They need to think really carefully about that and get an international legal team in place so this doesn't happen to them.
Well, the other thing I'm thinking too is if lived in New Zealand or was, looking for an international job, I don't think I would work for this Zuru company. I think they did themselves a big PR disservice by going after Glassdoor.
Agreed. That's terrible PR for them. Terrible. It's terrible for both. It's bad for Glassdoor. It's bad for Zuru. Everybody loses. So well done, Zuru.
Okay. Do we want to talk about the
Yes, the highest performing press releases of 2022 so far and what they have in common?
So it's interesting. I sort of saw some themes. A lot were, if you were lucky enough as a PR person to work on a very high profile client, it makes your life very much easier than if you're working on a company or a person who nobody knows.
Mm-hmm.
But then it also talks about some things that make your release appealing. Of course, the first thing, as they've listed here, is the headline.
So should we read some of the headlines of these?
Yeah.
See why they're so compelling? So we've got Mark Cuban cost plus drug companies online pharmacy launches with lowest prices on 100 life-saving prescriptions. Altos Labs launches with the goal to transform medicine through cellular rejuvenation programming. Hudsonville Ice Cream introduces 7 new Little Debbie snack cakes inspiring flavors. Awesome. Microsoft to acquire Activision Blizzard to bring the joy and community of gaming to everyone across every device. Duncan Hines partners with global superstar Dolly Parton to bring new Southern-style desserts to the tab.
So of those, the top 5, what do you think? Is there like something that's a theme, a thread as to why these were the top 5 performing releases on Cision?
I mean, yes, the headlines are good. However, the news is good.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. And the client, oh, Dolly Parton, gee, what a tough one. Oh, Mark Cuban, what a tough one.
It's
right.
Big news with big impact. That means a lot with brand recognition. So, I mean, on the
one, and ice cream.
The ice cream one was the least well.
But it's everybody loves ice cream.
Right.
It's funny. I don't know Hudsonville. I don't know Debbie snack cakes. I don't know, but it says ice cream.
Little Debbie snacks.
No, I don't. I'm from New York. I don't know this. What is this? I don't go to grocery stores.
I would say the Microsoft one is the most compelling because they say what's happening, which is obviously big. Microsoft is making an acquisition, but then they also bring in like a little bit of marketing edge to it to bring the joy and community of gaming to everyone across every device. It's simple. It says what it is. And I think a lot of times with press releases, we get so dry and straightforward and so like, and we forget it's still a marketing play. You still have to position the company in a favorable light. You still have to give it some spin, massage it, give it marketing flair. It has to have a little color and pizzazz and lights and whistles and bells. Like you can't just put, Microsoft acquired Activision Blizzard. That's not as compelling as the way they did it. To bring the joy and community of gaming. Yep. Right. And that's not newsy. There's never a news headline that looks like that.
But it explains why it's important that these companies are acquiring, Microsoft's acquiring this company. And those companies are hugely known as well. Well, I was going to say the first 2 ones are interesting to me because they're both healthcare related, right? The top 2. Now, the first one, Mark Cuban, and it's about online pharmacy at a lower cost, life-saving prescriptions. These are things that we're talking about all the time, and nobody is doing anything for the layperson, the civilian out there. Mark Cuban he's a genius, right? This is genius. Then the other one is another transform medicine, cellular rejuvenation program. Who even knows what that is? But I think that
right. But it's got that with the goal to it's aspiration.
Your health will be better. It's very interesting. So then the other things that they talk about, the visuals that are included in these, and I opened some of them. Now look at the one, the Duncan Hines with Dolly Parton.
Amazing.
Right. You can't not open a release with all these photos of Dolly Parton.
So just for people that aren't seeing it, it's a picture of Dolly Parton in a beautiful bright pink blouse and a matching bow in her hair. And she's like posing, cutting a cake. And then in front of the cake is this beautiful pink box of Duncan Hines. And then it says Dolly. And then it's like Dolly Vanilla, Dolly. I can't read the what the other banana, I don't know.
It's like a human Barbie doll, basically.
Yeah, it's a great photo.
Yeah, the whole it's styled, it's amazing. And there's a few photos if you open it up, different angles of the same thing. So then they talk about the way it's laid out. Releases are laid out too. That's the strategic formatting.
Yeah, the formatting. So bolded headlines, the subheads, the bolded lists of key data points or takeaways, short 2 to 3 sentence paragraphs, block quotes to call it expert opinions or commentary, and then eye-catching visuals. I actually just saw somebody do a release where they put the key takeaways of the release up front before they even started the release. They did it more like Marketing Dive format. Do you know how Marketing Dive stories?
Or like Business Insider?
Yeah, and it's like the 3 why it matters.
Yes.
And then it has that strategic format.
It also helps the people who are writing it to really think about it and make it better.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree with that too. But it's funny. So I'm looking at, this is the top 25. One of the headlines, Boney Mellon announces leadership succession plan, naming Robin Vince CEO-elect. Why is that such a great performing press release, right? I understand in finance.
Wait, what's BNY again?
It's Bank of New York. So it's a big financial services corporation now. It's publicly traded, etc. But who the hell knows who this person is or cares, right?
That is weird. And it's right next to Elon Musk to acquire Twitter, which is obvious, right?
Which is like underneath that.
And then
so this is, and it's got a photo of Mr. Gibbons here. So I wonder if part of the way these things perform so well, one is, do they have like everybody who works at Boney Mellon like tweet these things or click on these things so that they get, do they send in all hands like, everybody should be reading today's press release?
I feel like I'm missing context. Is that because the CEO, had to step down for some crisis reason?
It says he's retiring.
Otherwise, why is that?
It's an executive move release, ultimately, right?
What's the luggage company disrupting airlines, saving travelers from carry-on fees? Take off luggage. They don't mention the name of the company in this release until the second paragraph.
That is odd.
I've never heard of such a thing. It's not even in the subhead. That seems like a terrible SEO play. How did this perform so well?
Well, so that's another question. Maybe what if like the PR team on this is so like super
called you in and you're like, who is this?
Yeah, what if they're just so super strategic and pro that they know how to do whatever they do and they've got an SEO team and that's why it's performing so well as well. Not only because like you said, this isn't written so well necessarily, but there might be something to the back end strategy with some of these releases. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, so thank you for tuning in for the PR Wind Down podcast.
And thank you to David for joining us for a very interesting interview.
Remember to submit your own agency stories and questions and to share our show with your friends and colleagues. If you subscribe and leave us a rating, it will also help us reach new listeners like you.
And if you have an anonymous PR horror story of your own, please send it our way at the contact email below the episode notes.
We can't wait to wind down with you again next time. Laura, what are you whistling? Come on, it was a song. There was some song. What are you whistling?
I was singing the song Veronica to myself by Elvis Costello.
Because of our show producer, Veronica?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So you were secretly serenading Veronica and not letting anyone know. All these episodes, I wanted you to serenade me, and you're serenading Veronica.
Well, if your name had a song attached to it.
Doesn't April have lots of songs?
Not by Elvis Costello.
Okay, that's fair.